And now we have, I would say, 70 minutes to respond for the speakers, to respond to some of the questions that were submitted via chat, and to have some discussion with the speakers. So if the speakers could be alert to the questions that might be addressed to them. And I think, Matthew, you will present the questions.
Yeah, greetings to all of you. There is a few questions yet. One question from Rutger Maurits in Holland, I guess. Has there been any fraternal worker from the Middle East to Europe yet? And how would you view possibilities for that? Who would like to answer about this issue? So the mission from on the other side, in a way. I don't know. Maybe André, about this question, since you were involved in ACO until recently.
I don't believe that there is any other fraternal worker in the sense where Nick Tramper was thinking about. I do. I think that there are many short time visit from people from the Middle East, especially for bringing some news and living and leading a worship in European churches so far. But I'm not sure that there was a long-term fraternal worker in the churches so far I know.
At least not in ACO directly, but I know that, for example, GZB did welcome, or the Reformed Church in Holland, maybe Wilbert van Zanen knows about it, welcomed a pastor from Egypt, from the Synod of the Nile, for an experience in one quarter of Amsterdam for 2 years, I guess, if I remember well.
That's right. And I think Dr. van den Berg was also raising her hand to speak about this.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Helen Murray van den Berg, do you know this project?
No, sorry, I'm probably just.
Okay, so.
No, I mean that I think there, but I don't know about ACO. So there have been. I happen to know something about CWM. So that there were a couple of fraternal workers also in Europe in certain contexts. But I wouldn't know about ACO. No.
Okay. Trying to see the other questions, but I think, I mean, this question would be very interesting to tackle and to imagine, because I'm sure that fraternal workers coming from the East could bring new insight also for people in the West. But in ACO, we don't have this experience yet. Only exchange of persons for a short time. Could ACO be an intermediate of letting know more about Middle East Orthodox churches in the West and in Western churches? Good question. Sometimes I find myself very hard already to explain the diversity of Middle East Protestantism and specific history of Armenians, for example, to people of my congregation or my Protestant churches. So are we, do we have enough tools to speak about Orthodox churches as Protestants? It's a good point. Who would like to address this, answer this question? Maybe Professor Murray van den Berg, you were giving some.
Yeah.
You were.
I think I in a sense that for me was the way for me the Protestants in the Middle East were the way to the Orthodox. So studying the missions to the Orthodox were the way to understand the Orthodox much better. So that is, but that's how it it happened for me. But maybe Rima, Dr. Nasrallah, can also say something about it, because I think, and in fact also what struck me, now I'm speaking from my European perspective, that say 35 years ago, when I started studying the churches of the Middle East, both Protestants and the Orthodox, it still was a very separate world, and the Orthodox were very separate in thinking from the Protestants. And what I see now is really that it is much more integrated, and you see both in Nest and in ETS in Cairo that there is also an interest in the Orthodox churches. So at the scholarly level, there is this interest. And at the same time, also in the Orthodox churches, of course, you still have the ones who are really kind of closing themselves off to what is happening in Protestant churches or even evangelicals. But you see others that are definitely more open to that. In Europe, in the Netherlands, I see a lot of Protestants who are now interested in the Orthodox churches, which really was not the case when I started researching this 30 years ago. So, but I mean, that's a perspective more from the scholarly side of things. So I'm sure others can add to that.
Okay, thank you. At least there is an openness. Yes, Dr. Rima Nasrallah. I think I can.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, good.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, like Helene said, at Nest, we have been triggered in the past 20 years now, 25 years, to try to explain from a Protestant perspective to the West about Orthodoxy and about the churches of the Orient. And I think the SEMO program that we have, the Studies in the Middle East program, that is very successful and has been and still is attracting a lot of people, theologians from the West, is exactly what this is about. Because we are here, because we are part of the culture, because we are part of the system and the mentality, we feel also that we are able to speak about Orthodox churches in a different way, and in a contextual way, that I think is yeah, it's a privilege that we can do that. So yeah, that's my contribution on this.
Thank you. There was yes, Jean-Claude.
Yeah, I would say that my main experience has been through the World Council of Churches, where I think it's really a place of integration. But on the spot, ecumenism is still something which is face resistance, I would say, for many reasons we could analyze. But really, I had a very positive experience, but mostly whether in the Middle East on occasional visit or in Geneva, it has been through the World Council of Churches, which I think it's, maybe we could refer to that also. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm reading in the chat that there is 2 interventions from Nick Trumper and also Salam Hanna about the link between, let's say, the challenges of the different historical era and their impact on mission. Like when Professor Farwat Wahba made this link between how politics happen to make some constraints and influence the way of mission could develop or not. So that they are evocating the rise of religious and non-religious fundamentalism, the challenge of the Syrian war, the refugee crisis, and there is so many challenges again now in the East. How do you see the work of ACO in the future among the many challenges and all those empowering crises which are affecting everybody? It's a huge question. But how are we going to be affected, and how are we going to evolve in the next few years? somebody would like to try to answer this big question or to have some insights.
Yeah, these are big questions and they are very difficult to answer. I think what Reverend Jolie said is nobody's going to emerge intact from this, including the ACO and including, I would add, the churches and the Christian institutions in the Middle East, among many other institutions. So right now, it is very difficult to see where we're going in the coming years. And I think for organizations like the ACO, it is not very easy to decide what to take up. That is why I think communication is so important, continuous communication between the churches of the Middle East and the churches of Europe, or organizations in the Middle East and organizations in Europe. But right now, it's, I think, very difficult to see where we're going. That would be my take on that question.
May I suggest something?
Yes.
As we are gathering now to have scholarly work and theoretical papers, what if you arrange a meeting, not a conference, but a meeting on practical issues? How can we cooperate on the ground together as people from the Middle East and from ACO in doing a work together on the field? I think now this is a time for us to talk with each other.
That would be a nice outcome of this 2 days conference. Yeah, sure. And myself as working for ACO, of course, we talk to each other about all those challenges, but we hardly can take time to think by taking time here to think about the challenges and how it impacts us, because we are running to fundraise and so on and so on. I see different questions coming from Mary Errol. 2 questions for Wilbert van Zane. First, in the era of decolonization, what was the status of the local Protestant or not Protestant churches? Were they a minority institution? And second question, did the ICO have any impact on Syrian Muslims in education, culture-wise?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. I think I'm probably not as qualified to answer these questions as some of the others in the room, but my answers would be that it's different for Syria and Lebanon, so that you can see that in the era of the decolonization, Protestants were less visible and are still less visible in Syria than they were in Lebanon. In Lebanon, I think you cannot speak of minority institutions in the time of decolonization, because institutions like the American University of Beirut were still professedly Protestant. But in Syria, it would have been less visible in places like Aleppo and Jazeera. Nevertheless, I think the presence of the Protestant missions was significant and was also seen by the authorities. If you look at, for example, the number of American missionaries that were active in Syria and Lebanon, they far exceeded the number of local ordained ministers and workers. And so they would have been very visible to the authorities. Then, did the ACO have any impact on Syrian Muslims, education and culture-wise? Yes, certainly. And I think that was a parallel story as the story that Dr. Wahba told about Egypt, that many Muslims were enrolled in the Protestant schools, and that is of course still the case. And so that was also the case in the time after World War II. So there was certainly an impact on Syrian Muslim students and their families. Yes, and there's much more to say about that. But these are my brief answers to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There is another question to Professor Helen Muren-Vandenberg. Do we see the traces of the theology of the 19th century American missionaries in today's Protestantism in Europe and the Middle East?
That's also a huge question, where there's many things that you could refer to. On the one hand, of course, especially I think in the Middle East, it's clear, and I think that the ones in the Middle East can say more about it than I can. But if I'm in the Middle East, I see traces of what the the missionaries brought and what is still there. So in that sense, I think that's very clear. In Europe, it's much less clear, though. One way to look at it is I was always surprised how at some point, I get the sense it's different now, but especially in the 70s and 80s, some of the evangelical movements were copying things from the 19th century American missionaries, both evangelicals from Europe and from the US, in a way that I sometimes found a bit, now I have to be careful, naive, in the sense that they were, in my sense, trying to use 19th century methods in the 20th century, which was not always true. So sometimes they really kind of renew these methods, but there is something of that. And I think now, if we look at it now, I think really the main, not the main, but one of the heritage of what the American missionaries did there is still there in a sense of community. So what the American, in my sense, there's lots of things to be said about missionaries, lots of things also negative, positive, but one of the really basic things that the missionaries did was establish a connection between groups that before that were very different, and trying to translate. I mean, that's an old metaphor, but I still like it very much, to translate between one group and another, to help people understand each other. And I think that is taken up not just from the American missionaries, of course, because the Catholics were doing it, and the European Protestants and Catholics were doing it. But I think that's still the heritage, and you see it coming back all the time. So in that sense, I think there is a heritage from what the missionaries, in the wider sense, not specifically the Americans, left us. But of course, because they are so, especially if you're talking from a kind of secular scholarship, often the negative aspects of the missionaries are emphasized, and sometimes rightly so. But I think we also have to see this. I think this really their kind of continuous emphasis on understanding and trying to relate and trying to build bridges, despite the fact that they often did not succeed because of their own preconceptions and all kinds of colonial stuff and whatever. So yeah, thank you.
Matthew, if I may do a slightly Middle Eastern turn into this same thing. I think, yes, part of the 19th century heritage is a good word, actually. I would say the culture that the missionaries brought, which included so much more than the mere communication of the Bible and its teachings, but it was the piety, the worship. But I would like to emphasize that even today, here and there in the Protestant communities in the Near East especially, you see still a focus on reaching out to the individual's mind and heart, which is not traditional. That in the traditional sense, it is the belonging to the larger group, which is important, but then the fresh focus on the individual, reaching out to the individual. I think that part of the heritage is there through faith statements or regular education. The second heritage that I want to, and I'll stop there, of course, is actually the institutions. I think that's yesterday in my presentation, I talked about institutional thinking. It's not simply owning institutions. Now, of course, I need to be critical against our institutions in the Middle East. We're not always as good as we would have wanted to be. However, the focus on running good institutions that serve everyone, the Muslim and the Christian and so on, that focus is still with us. So these are some of the areas. I'm not going theological too much about it, but this is the type of culture heritage.
May I add something, please?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Helen and Paul. I think you covered most of my thoughts, especially Paul, from a Middle Eastern perspective, but I can add to that the concept about mission that we inherited from the American missionaries is the one that shaped the mission mindset of the church in the Middle East. I mean that we received the message from the American missionaries, and this is my area of study, especially in Egypt, that you as Egyptians, as Middle Easterns, your main concern will be on church. But our main concern will be on mission, which means that we grow up as mission-centered church. Church-centered church, not mission-centered church. So you can see the spirit of mission from Middle Eastern countries for maybe a century or more is very weak, because we receive the message that mission work is not for you. You have the work of the church, but mission work is for those who are coming from outside, mainly from Europe and from America. Now there is a wake up in the churches in the Middle East that we can be church.
Then, for medical reasons, I will have.
That we can be a mission church, and now there are many efforts from Middle Eastern churches to go out and do a mission. This is one aspect from different aspects we inherited from the American mission. This includes also offerings, fundraising, and the worship style, theological education, and so on. But this is another topic. But yes, we kept the heritage, and we are faithful for it. And we are in the time to get out of it and be ourselves.
Matthew, I think we have to end the question or discussion period if possible.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you so much. I just simply read Ani Bujikanyan said, would preachers from the Middle East who are in Europe be considered ever as missionaries? Well, I think it's a rhetorical question she asked there. Okay, thank you so much for this discussion period.
Paul?
Yes, thank you.
Before moving to the last word, can I share the results of the poll?
Please do. Yes. Don't see it.
Are they not visible yet? I think there's a bit of a delay. Well, I can tell you that just before you see it, and maybe you'll see it in a minute, I have pressed the share button, that in the first question, in your view, what type of personnel is needed in Christian mission today? Most people said long-term missionaries or fraternal workers between 2 and 10 years. And a few people said short-term missionaries, less than 2 years. Nobody said career missionaries. So we are in agreement that there's no need for career missionaries anymore. And then brief interventions of experts. And then the question, in your view, what should be the focus of Protestant mission in the Middle East today? The most popular answer, or the thing that most of you think is important, is peace and reconciliation. 78% of the respondents clicked peace and reconciliation, with education coming second, 68% of you, and support for churches coming third. So I can see that the sharing is not working, but these are the main results of the poll. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's okay, thank you so much. If you could, yes. Oh, now it appears, Reverend. Now we see it.